Close your eyes and observe a moment of deep listening, an invitation to be with breath, to be with body, spirit, the things that are always present even when we are not paying attention, an invitation to just be. Here, we are not fixed in one body or time period. We move through what is acknowledged and what has yet to emerge, mapping around histories carried and residing in our bodies and marked on our flesh. We enter South African minds and find lungs contaminated by history, brimming full of mind dust. In 6 movements, we return to exploited and maimed bodies, the breath of miners, and birth canals turned into gears in the machine of capitalism. Sons born into the state's mind tomb. A nod to Saidiya Hartman's Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments signals to the wayward women who negotiate with the destiny of their lives. We alternate between breath, death, birth, miscarriages, and stillbirths. Mine, possession as well as retrieval. Mine, ownership as well as a return. Here, time, marked by arrivals and departures, asks, what is present in the absence, and what or who do we reckon with in the gaps? The now is filled with the then, the before, the not yet, and the might be. We are invited to notate the sacraments of unburying, lighting fires, offering sacrifices, singing their names, pouring libations, speaking to bones, unearthing bones, reburying bones. We are invited to breathe in rooms saturated with history, to map losses, take inventory of our grief and inheritance. What is mine? What is ours? I would now like to invite Uhuru to share from Mine.
Realocha, Tobela, Dumelang. Thank you so much for being here this evening. I appreciate it. I'm going to share with you from Mine. It's an epic that's in 6 movements, and I'm going to be reading from movement 2, movement 3, 4, and 6. So bear with. I'm going to be sharing generously. I'm going to be reading for at least half an hour. In 2018, a historic silicosis class action lawsuit against the mining industry in South Africa was settled in favor of the miners. Footnote: the miners are dead. Bringing legality into matters of state versus property reproduces colonial violence. How about land? What about white capital? What about black overlords? Some are still buried under mine shafts. An unpayable debt, no favor, an incalculable catastrophe explored in 6 movements. Movement 2. A vicious modernity disfigures black maternity, turns black women's wombs into factories producing blackness, wombs of profit and profits, birth canal strengthening GDP, ushering children into non-status, non-being, black women's birth canals, domestic middle passages, forced to deliver sons into the mind tomb of the state, a dehumanizing project that traps mothers into obligatory reproduction to honor patriarchs, to honor capitalist duties, widows with living husbands, birthing sorrow and longing, youthful hearts gorged by grief under patriarchal oath and code of silence. We do not speak of our heartbreak, the depression, the inability to breathe, the lustful nights, the desire for flight, the foundering dreams of the city of lights, the unspoken rights to partake in the gold. We shall forget the newborn, the ones we buried and never talk about, the tongues we had to swallow in our mourning, trailed with blood stains of memory. We shall master silence and forgetting, grieving but not crying, rotating between pregnant and breastfeeding, grieving a miscarriage and pregnant, breastfeeding after a miscarriage, grieving a stillbirth while pregnant, bleeding a miscarriage while breastfeeding, pregnant, grieving and miscarrying, grieving infertility after stillbirth, breeding, feeding and bleeding, breastfeeding a stillborn while grieving a miscarriage, grieving postnatal breeding. Ke motswetsi ke imile ke a tlhoboga ke imile ke a tlhoboga ke motswetsi ke motswadi wa go tlhoka setswetsi ke motswetsi wa go tlhoka lesea. Not waving but drowning, grieving, birthing boys that become profit, hating love that grieves the heart, closing heart against willful abduction, grieving husbands who become profitable boys, grieving stillbirth in the stillness of longing, lasting grief in the breastfeeding of profitable boys, miscarrying orgies of postnatal, gross, domestic loss. Do not cry. Uskalla. Ullalang. Ullalang. Uskalla. Grieving, but not crying. In 1961, my grandmother went to the city of lights with her husband, lodging hidden in the crevices of the cold compounds. The matriarchs orchestrated the visit. She wasn't ovulating when he came home. A mule with a practical agenda, 2 weeks top. But the iciness of the city bonded their flesh longer. In the middle of the night, a raid. Hide behind the curtain of history. under the blanket of white terror. Hey boy, what's this kafir bitch doing here? She doesn't have a permit. Sorry, boss. Hey bitch, this is not bloody Gazankulu. Don't look at me when I talk to you. Boy, does your wife know you play with whores in this shack of yours? Please, she's my wife. Our child just died and we are grieving. Listen to this kafir acting white. My child just died. I want her gone before the sun comes out. And they were gone, leaving a flame of shame, licking clean all affection, bringing the weight of rage to crush their disposable lives. Do not cry. Uskalla. Ullalang mara. Ullalang. Uskalla. We do not speak about those things. The present is a tough terror to swallow, a contaminated place to breathe, artificial in cemetery, windows broken by inherited shame, grief, longing, loss, spiritual dis-ease, the terror of leaving and never coming back, rageful outbursts of unprocessed grief, fermenting in the foaming mouth, swelling, inflamed, sprouting outgrowths. History is brewing in my uterus, fibroiding and braiding my past with a present that triggers minefields. Miners shot dead. My mother's neurosis ruptures her psychic spleen, a mental hiccup, reflex gag, mineral heartburn of a tumor in the belly of her beauty, the mark of the beast. I am of her embodied grief. Body, an inventory of leaving, black rage in swallow. My skin, a pathology of violent encounters, an inhalation of fibric intimacies, a memorial to enforced labor. How do you raise daughters to become widows? To be the most unmarried, married women, to mother without fathers, to break flowers in their mouth, to live with the aftertaste of extermination. Well, they must excel at swallowing grief, kneel at the altar of duty, martyr themselves in their father's honor, be eloquently unsung, be obedient to loss, especially of self. Too many grievances spoil the rot, a calculus of black female death. There is no space for your tears here. Ulalang. Uskalla, ulalang. Your depression offends me. The weak die before they are born, and girl, you are going to live, even if it kills you. Do you know the troubles I've seen? Do you know what trouble lie ahead for a black woman like yourself? I need to toughen you up. I would have failed if I didn't prepare you for the world that's not set up for you and me, a system that makes cemeteries of us, that lowers coffins of our husbands in us, in our bowels, in our throats, sons that never make it back, husbands that husband and father other families, komaboneng, with buried daughters like you, daughters like us, for they have brought grief won't even look at you. Young bulls are prized. Boys, boys, boys. We were born widows in this condition that doesn't have a name. A mother without children. A neurosis of history. Police pester pedestrians for passes, dump us, my life, my wife, hungry hand comes back with nothing from the rear pocket. Where's your pass, boy? Now I ride in the Kwela Kwela. Heavy air, massive with song and solidarity. Moments of clamoring clarity. Amandla, away to my boo, yeah, Africa. In jail, we eat political education, wash it down with revolution amid rats, cockroaches, and ticks. In the mines, we get shorn like black sheep. The prisons shave us like disease-infested infidels. Our lungs are filled with silicosis. In the mines, we are asphyxiated. In the prisons, lungs riddled with tuberculosis. We cannot breathe, drowning in the blood of tortured comrades who fell from the 9th floor by slipping on a piece of soap while washing, by hanging on the 9th floor while slipping. White lies infiltrating radioactive waves of international press. The natives are restless, says one headline, while prisoners' heads are in the firing line. My grandfather towing the line of secretly throwing black fists in the air while playing docile, drilling the gold standard of white monopoly. America, America, arbiter of morality, enemy of dirty communists, assisting apartheid, apprehend and assassinate black anti-racist activists through severe surveillance and perverse alliances to subdue revolution. Jim Crow and apartheid sitting in a tree. Killing. Apartheid and Thatcher sitting in a tree. Kissing. French kissing federal intelligence, building iron curtains with our gold, intercepting and infiltrating insurrections, chasing imagined red peril and Roy Gefars. We will protect our right to pillage Africa for natural resources by any means necessary. Trample them with the might of our first world. We are America. We are America. These kafirs and niggers don't know the real cost of civilization they enjoy. We will crush any savage and barbarian who wants to stop progress. You can count on us, Verwoerd. We locked away that terrorist, Sobukwe. We provided intel for Lily's farm raid, where those bloody savages and nigger lovers thought they could bring the Algerian revolution to South Africa. They will rot in jail, sir. They will rot in jail. Yes, sir. They will rot in jail. Abelungu. Abelungu, God damn. Abelungu, God damn. Abelungu, God damn. Basibiza Abu Jim. Abelungu, God damn. Abelungu, God damn. Mississippi, God damn! Movement 4. Cross-dressed to board the train on which only virile men are allowed, swallowed by white desire for boys, 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 for Jims and Johns. Under the solemn gaze of conductor sits in suits and pants the wayward black women who refuse the destiny of their lives. Like flight from the plantation, the escape from slavery, the migration from the south, the rush into the city, black women fled the countryside where they were fated to continue rural production, their wombs rendered factories of black labor reproducing blackness and abjection. They refused their roles, carved from bone the choice to resist. Likers of things, wayward and extra, they dared to imagine the city of light. Strolls down Sophiatown streets, choreography was their art, a practice of moving even when there's nothing to go, no place left to run, the swaying of hips, of stages, of song, the swaying of hips on stages of song, swingsters, merrymakers, skylarks, diponono, arranging their bodies to elude capture, efforts that make the uninhabitable livable, to escape confinement of four-cornered worlds and tight, airless matchbox houses. Tumult, upheaval, flight. It was the articulation of living force. It was the way to insist. I am unavailable for servitude. I refuse it. Khawuleza mama, khawuleza. Khawuleza mama, khawuleza. Home places as hotbeds of resistance, children growing up with their grandmothers, mothers and aunts, witnessing enterprising businesses from their homes, brewing and selling alcohol, baking scones, making magwinya, selling acha and cold drinks. Khawuleza, iyo mama, khawuleza. Khawuleza mama. Khawuleza is a South African song. It comes from the township reservations, locations near Johannesburg. The children shout from the streets as they see police cars coming to raid their homes. They say, khawuleza mama, which simply means, hurry up mama and hide. Please don't let them catch you. Sending signals and whistles to women folk to warn them of approaching police, embodying political currency, articulating resistance as everyday practice, harmonizing the community with its call to revolt. Khawuleza, shosholoza, black lives on the move, black bodies in resonance. Children socialized within refusal, inheriting collective suspicion of police, strengthening communal bonds and trust in urban black communities. Mam Dokas, queen pin of the reef, owner of herself and many a man, curtailing many a legislation, skirting fiction of the state, shifting means of production to her backyard and turning shack into palace of dreams where revolutions are made, a veritable compound of stars where hip, identities are created. Ma'auti in Brentwood and Dopsy, relishing dops of mellowwood. Charlie Mingas serenading the day. Kipimweketsi flowering nightfall. Comrade poets reading banned literature or smuggling records, paintings and letters through Aus Dockers, Swaziland Connects. Tsotsis brandishing knife skills of musketeer, putting holes in miners' weekly pay, gashing flesh with a gambling impulse. Aus Matsidiso, called Mary by her madam, who loves dogs and tolerates Africans. Her home, an embattled zone of domestic surveillance, dutiful discipline, a daily routine, social warfare on black female body. Hateful mine bosses give white wives rights to prowl auction blocks and hire house slaves whom they rename Matsidiso now girl, T-girl, maid girl. Faithful white women embrace white power and white wealth, wear sleeves of gold and cloak white terror, kleptocracy, cocky pride, enjoy spoils of their men's exploits. Their husbands only see black women during enactments of male power, defile us in front of their wives, in refuge of their castles, cut our faces with bones of their scorned ribcage, suckle their spawn Adam on the bleak bounty of our body, wetness against the aesthetic of their breast, to be perked and firmer in richness and in health for husband's tenderness after he's drained his violence in us. A lapse in judgment of momentary fall from grace, tempted by the devil with an insatiable appetite. White women call us whores. Black men call us whores. See us as sites of conquest that mock their shame, smack us in the face for getting hit by racing horse carts of their masters' virile machine, weaponized. We, receipts of deceit in seventh quarter where Adam you suckled, comes of age in threadbare linens of rites of bus passage, historical master copy of the father's original sin, braiding the raiding of my grandmother's body with the fibroid of my daughter. Comrade Kwezi, sobered by the precarity of blackness, of living in the violence of a waiting room, joined the ranks of forces, jumped barbed wire fences into the heart of darkness, searching for light of liberation through comrade crocodile jaws, craving her tender flesh, fresh with raw desire. Recalling survival tips, she stabs him in the eye, but being in a movement where the one-eyed comrades are hailed as heroes in parades of strength and uniformed ceremonies of primordial social hierarchies, predatory sizing of the wilderness, blood of life and death, embroiling on the threshing floor of battlefield, biting and gasping, trusted Kada, heating his shrill mushini in the natural oven of the savannah, fighting for men's freedom and nationalization of the mines, mine, ownership paradigm exported from the auction block to unequal power relation of court rulings. Using laws our rapists wrote to put our rapists on trial. Amandla ngawethu madoda. Movement 6. Lefa la ntate ke mahloko le maswabi le boitsholo ba go fenywa ba go tlhabisa dihlong ba go tlhoka mantswe ba go omisa leleme ba mo tsietse botho a sa phela ba mo tsiela polelo a sa na le molomo ba mo tsiela lentswe a sa na le leleme motho ke sera seo fela se rego ge se rakeletšwe se se na leleme se lahle botho se tlhabane ka marumo. Our inheritance is deep disgrace, shame, silence, and defeat that dries our mouths and leaves deserts in our souls. My grandfather's humanity was taken while he was alive. His language broken in his mouth, his tongue severed and buried. A human being is a beast that, when cornered and its tongue taken, throws away his humanity and fights ferociously with weapons. But did we die? Yes, we did die. Found salvation from whoredom and lascivious eyes of the master, salivating over harems on plantations and servants' quarters. Black bodies on strike, self-immolate for transcendence, out of the ruins and smolder of remarkable destruction. In the thick silence of starry darkness, the blackness of creation, a vision and a voice. Do not be afraid, you have found favor and redemption. Unto you, daughters shall be born with medicine for the lineage in the bones of their tongues. Yes, we did die in the blackness of destruction and creation. We part our hips like the sea and birth ourselves. Use our mothers' names to sing our resurrection. Weave our purpose with gifts from 3 wise women who imprinted scriptures forged out of stardust and spectacular smithereens of our former selves into kilts of our hearts. Moonlight illuminates our new name, the dying wish of burning mouths, blazing in our bones, blossoming with revelations of our spirit supreme.
So I thought that maybe we'd start at the beginning, which maybe might be the middle or someplace else for you. And I kind of maybe thought that we could start with what came before mine for you, creatively, academically, dream space wise. Yeah, like what came before this?
Hi again. I had been working on my book, an academic book, on an elder poet who lived in exile in the US during apartheid. And through that work, I got to interview a lot of elders who are exile returnees and holding space for their stories that are really not heard or told, because they really sit with a lot of trauma. I think when we think of exile, we can tend to romanticize it. And I was sitting for the first time with this trauma by these elders, men and women, who lived in exile. And this was in preparation for my academic degree. And after that, I continued to interview these elders to write a book. And my grandfather died in 2017, and this was in the duration of writing this book that I'm talking about. And I remember feeling like, you know, my mother told me, my father died, your grandfather died. And I remember feeling like, yeah, well, I didn't know him that well, so should I go to the funeral? Should I not go to the funeral? And luckily I had the wherewithal to go, but I sat with the question, why do I not know him? Why do I not know my grandfather? And the more I sat with the question, the more the story of his life as a migrant laborer came to the fore. He worked in the mines in Johannesburg. I am from Limpopo. I'm from Bochum. And he worked in the mines in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s. And working in the mines at the time, you were called Lekholwa. You left in January and came home for 3 weeks in December. And that's when you could see your family and spend time with them. And I realized, wow, that's why I don't know him. And I sat with my mother and asked questions about my grandfather. And I remember her hurt about or around growing up with this absent father, but present absence and absent presence, because he was not at large. He would come back once a year. But I noticed the deep hurt in her, and I wanted to sit with that. And when she spoke about his last days, my mother was a doctor, so she cared for my grandfather on his deathbed. She said to me, hey, you know, bo papa ne ba tlhatja madi, ntho e yang disturb. So she said, my father was vomiting blood. This thing really is very disturbing to me. And that's, I guess, one way in which I arrive at mind, because I sat with these questions, and then I sat with the grief of coming to terms with the fact that there's a family member I didn't know, and because it's tied to larger politics of the state, it's tied to the making of global capitalism, it's tied to racism. So in my grief, in grieving my grandfather, when I went into the grief, it opened up so many politics that I think there's something very particular about black grief. black grief is so thick. It's so multi-layered. It's an inward battle, but as you expand into the interior, it opens up into the lineage, the family, the nation, the continent. Mm-hmm. You're grieving your grandfather and you're in the Atlantic. And that's how I came to it. But I was writing this book, going back to this book, and at that particular moment, I had been struggling with writing about the concept of racial capitalism, which essentially is the ways in which capitalism and the making of race are inextricably tied. That blackness was created in the moment of the creation of capitalism. There is no capitalism without blackness, without the black body. And I was like, damn it! I've been trying to understand this concept by Cedric Robinson. It's a Cedric Robinson theory. And when I read closer, I learned that Cedric Robinson himself coined the phrase after studying the South African mining industry. So it was a very particular kind of geography and economic dynamic and history that informed his own coining of this concept of racial capitalism. And so that really created a big shift in me to locate these big theories: racial capitalism, white supremacist, capitalist, heteropatriarchal, Christian, to locate them in my body. I was like, this racial capitalism is in my body, is in my grandmother's loss. Her pregnant with my mother and grieving the loss of her husband who is away in the mines. My mother witnessing the absence of her father, birthing me. I'm in that lineage of loss to the mining industry, to racial capitalism, to the making of Southern African modernity, the entire region of Southern Africa, the foundations of capitalism here, of global capitalism, is the mining industry. And it is our fathers, our brothers, our grandfathers that were fuel to that machine. And we never ever talk about it. We don't talk of the mining industry. In fact, before this moment of 2017 when my grandfather passed, if you said to me mining, you'd miss me on that. I'd, start thinking about a shopping list or something. Because mining was such a far removed idea from my mind. So it's such a site of trauma, ongoing. Ongoing. It's not in the past. Ongoing. And writing this collection, which I thought, let me gather my thoughts around this and write some pieces. And when I opened that door, when I said in the first lines, my grandfather is dead. He died vomiting blood. Lungs brimming full with mine dust. That just opened many, 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 many doors. We associate mining with boys and men in gumboots and hard hats. But I wanted to also explore the scale of extraction, excavate the scale of extractive violence. If the boys and men produced the gold that fueled a flourishing racial capitalism, a flourishing capitalist economy, then who produced the boys and the men? Wombs were extracted, families were extracted, marriages were extracted, communities were extracted, our spirits were extracted. So it's in the body, it's in the air, it's in the water. It's ubiquitous. Yeah, let me stop there.
I think that what the epic does, and what you do so profoundly in the epic, is move us through these different movements, you know, and even just listening to you read. And we had a conversation earlier in the week, and I said, you know, like whenever I hear the work and whenever I read the work, it feels very like in the body, like what you're saying, it feels very embodied, you know. And I think that even afterwards, and you said, I just have to move it around, you know, I get that, because the way that it lodges and the way that it sits, you feel that by the time that you come to the end, you've accumulated quite a bit. And I was thinking about, so I thought that maybe in our conversation we could move through different movements that I have given titles or names, just because it might help just me to track where we're moving to. But the first movement that I thought that maybe we could talk about, that you've touched on in having conversations with your mother when your grandfather had passed, is about citation. You know, the book opens with various citations, the epigraph, the footnote. You bookend the collection with citation and with the notes at the end. And I wondered if maybe you could share a bit about the material that you were sitting with and how you moved through that, both like the actual physical material, but also the material that is in the body, and how you were navigating all of that citation and
it's an accumulation of the reading that I had been doing. So I wrote Mine in 2019, and I gave you a bit of the history around what I was doing creatively. I had just finished a PhD. I was reading to write my book. I'm a nerd. I should have led with that.
And smart as shit.
So I just read a lot, and the field of Black study is so inspiring to me. The field of Black studies. There's groundbreaking scholarship. There's groundbreaking creative work. Film, photography, I'm consuming all of that all the time, especially during this time, for years. And I think, you know, when I was writing Mine, I wasn't sitting with texts around me and kind of pulling one. I think that I was tapping into the archive of the body, of everything that has accumulated in my mind and in my body, which were the things that I read, but also cellular memory of this mining experience. So working through ritual and meditation to access some of this grief and the loss that is mine, but also my mother's and my grandmother's and our family and our lineage. So doing root work, if you do any somatic work, we speak of root work as the power center of your family and your lineage. So doing that work, but at the same time also having read so much that all of this material was available to me in the process of writing. So I would remember a line and then I would write it and then I will cross-check later that I'm quoting it in the exact way. But I feel like there's no writing from me that can ever happen that is not happening in community. I want to think of myself as somebody who thinks with others, who comes from a lineage of thinkers. I write in the tradition of the way my mother and aunt and my sister speak. I write in the tradition of the way the women in my family speak. I'm a literary scholar, so I've studied epics, and they've all been by men. The epics in poetry, in the poetry tradition, have all been by men. And I think that the epic is quite a feminine genre. It's quite a it's got this, it's gendered in specific ways. And that's what I realized in the act of writing. I was gonna write poems in the conventional way, multiple poems on this, but it came out as an epic interconnecting everything fractally, from the body to the state, from the body to the continent, from the body to the black world, to the diaspora, to Southeast Asia. So I think that the epic allowed that, and I think it's also influenced by all of the reading that I do in the field of Black Studies, which is geographically wide. And wild? Wide.
Both wild and wide. It can be wild and it can be wide. I was going to ask you about breath, but you've actually taken me into the movement that I want to go into that's about space, you know? Like I found like that the space in the work took on a life and a character of its own, you know, like the spatial composition in the work just started to just take on this embodiment of like, hi, I'm space, you know, we are underground, we are above ground, we are forward and backwards, we are in the body, we are outside of the body. And I was thinking about, well, I was curious to know about how you were thinking about structuring space in the work, but also what kind of space that you were negotiating while dreaming and making this work, because the space is such a prominent thing in the work. We go everywhere, you know, it's water, land. Yeah, I was curious about that.
That's an interesting reading. I think there's something very particular about the mines. Nobody has access to the mines. You can't go there to go and do research, or you can't decide to ask the mine bosses to go underground. It's inaccessible. It's an inaccessible space. And I think that works in favor of the industry, because you cannot go and see the full scale of this violence that this place is able to enact. You can only go there imaginatively, which, you know, I had to do. The mine is inaccessible. That's why we don't think of it. It's underground. We don't think about something below where we are sitting right now. You know, maybe Johannesburg is beginning to think about underground because things are, yeah. There's large holes under the city. Very deep. I don't remember the exact numbers. When I was doing the research, I was like, Aibo, is this even possible? Like that, how deep they went. You can't go into the mines. That's just wild that you can't visit this place. So, I've had to imagine what it feels like. I had to imagine breathing there. You mentioned breath. I had to imagine my grandfather, a boy in the 60s, and many other boys being taken from these wide, sprawling rural lands where they headed their livestock in the open air, in the mountains. I come from the mountains of Bochum, river, open air, livestock, stars, being taken from that and being put in 18 boys per room hostels. And then I had to really sit with the image of the first day that the alarm rang to wake everybody up and they went for the first time under. I can't imagine what kind of, I can't imagine the turmoil, the fear, the terror. We're going under. I've never been under. I've been in a basement. The terror of it. And that's the space that I've that I spend a lot of time willing in my meditation, in my imagination, trying to take myself there. And the biosphere is very important in mine. A contaminated biospheric world. I think we don't think enough about the biosphere and the cosmos. I think colonialism has robbed us of much, but we also must see how it has locked us into the territory, land, here-ness, now-ness. We don't look up anymore. We don't consider air anymore. We are here. We are locked to the now and to the land and to what is visible and what we can see. And in thinking about the underground, I had to critically think about breathing, what kind of biosphere is down there, what's in the air, what populates this that is being breathed. And is it here right now? Is it rising from the underground into the biosphere of Johannesburg, Gauteng, and getting wider and wider? And geographically, I think mine spans extensive geography. There's the trans-Indian Ocean slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, there's Brazil. And I think it's because the grief the dehumanization of black bodies for the sake of white capital and white leisure and white gain. Once you start exploring it, it expands to the global south in that way. My grandfather, who was a boy, is also in Brazil. The mining industry there also wreaked havoc. I, in fact, wrote large parts of Mine in Brazil. And once you explore that extraction of the body for the sake of capital, it doesn't stop at the black body. It goes outward to the larger global south. That's why with the anti-colonial movements in the 60s, they would speak of Pan-Africanism, and then they realized, whoa, we have to expand this thing because this is a shared experience with Asians and with Latin Americans. A third world movement then came into being because it was apparent that this beast, this multi-headed hydra, this hungry machine ate up everybody in the global south. And I think that's the kind of multiple geographies also of interiority. I mean, all of it really begins inside and moves outward and comes back again and moves outward again.
And that was going to be my next. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to open it up. I have lots more questions, but I think I don't think my voice is that interesting. On page 42 of Mine, well, not the whole thing, but in that poem, there's a line that says, he left, went, he was always away, leaving, always going, knowing going more than staying. And then on page 51, close your eyes and see the scattered bones, collaterals of stolen conquest, unburied, excavated without libation, the living dead, whisper thunderous command, ceremony, ceremony, where is the ritual, the song and prayer? Here, now, hear us, here, 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 here. There is time that sits between absence and presence. There is time that is not confined or regulated by the clock. And then there's time that cannot be calculated. There is the accumulation of loss, memory, questions over time. The book, you find yourself wading through questions. And then there were moments where I found myself thinking about this relationship that we have with expedited grief, and grief that is processed over time through rituals, or through the rituals that we have to process grief. And I was wondering about the different ways of mapping or observing time that you were thinking about or thinking through in thinking about all of that.
These are not easy questions.
No. Please pass me that. Sure. Yeah, Cotton. You cold?
Okay. I think there's a draft coming from. Sure.
Well, yeah, it's just, I think. No, I was just wondering about your observation of, or how you're observing time and marking time and mapping time, but also mapping time in relation to grief and grieving and processes of grief.
Yeah, yeah. So lately there's been global grief, right? There's been globally this talk about loss, collective loss, grief around the COVID pandemic, but also grief around environmental catastrophe. And every time I hear the discourse around the climate crisis, there's always this fear that, you know, the world is coming to an end. The world is coming to an end. And sitting with this, I am sitting with the reality that the world came to an end for my family. The world came to an end with colonial invasion. The world came to an end with the making of race and capital. The world came to an end in 1492. The world came to an end over and over with forced removals. The world came to an end for black people over and over. It's not something that is in the future. So that already messes up your concept of time, that the world is continuously coming to an end for black people. Black people live with world-ending events daily. The world is coming to an end right now in Congo. In Palestine, the world is continuously coming to an end for people. It's not somewhere in the future. Only the privileged can speak of the world coming to an end looking forward, right? So what does it mean to embody, to be in this body, black, female, South African, African, and start to excavate this moment of grief. That's why I say there's something very specific about black grief. You think it's about your grandfather and then, you know, you're an Afro-pessimist. You're like, the making of this modernity came through Black Death. So we are living in and through Black Death every day. And grief is the climate. It is the air we breathe. Grief is black life. So future, past, up, down, tomorrow, yesterday becomes quite warped by grief, because grief interconnects and also throws out the past, the present, and future in very interesting ways, I think. I feel like all your questions I haven't answered.
You have. You actually have. And you've answered ones that are on page 74 of my list. So you're doing it. I would now like to, I have many more questions, but I think I would like to invite you into the conversation. So if you have a question, do not be shy. Yes, I think that there is.
Yeah, we need a mic, please, Terry.
Yes, you could even. Is it possible to use this mic? I can just put it in the corner and some people can.
Hi. Yes. Okay. Hi, Uhuru. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was really, really beautiful. I guess in a way, maybe there's a way in which this question answers itself, but I would kind of, be interested to hear your thoughts on this, because I know your work from a different context and not necessarily through kind of the poetic. So in one way, there's a way in which we could say poetry is the art of the commons, maybe, that allows us to tell kind of our own stories, you know, kind of the origins of our stories through fiction, you know, kind of a combination of the historical and the fictional. But I guess the question is, how did you land up through this form as a way that you wanted to tell the story of where you come from and kind of your life? Just kind of looking at the work that you've done before, if someone would have asked me, I would have guessed that you would write like a critical essay or, you know, yeah, I guess it's a question about form.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that the poetic is the language of the body. There is something about poetry that, for me at least, moves through logic in a certain way that is not theoretical. It captures what I want to say in very precise ways that I don't have to kind of rationalize with my brain. Okay, so let me give an example. I had written an abstract for an academic kind of conversation where I link, by the way, also breaking news, fibroids affect black women more than any other race of women, disproportionately. And I've always been wondering what's up with that. So I had written an abstract where I want to connect fibroids to the mining industry. And you can imagine, it's just like, you're a literary scholar, why are you playing in other people's lanes? You're not a medical humanities person, you don't know anything about wombs, you're not a reproductive scholar, so please stay in your own lane, right? So that was quickly dismissed. But I managed to bring it all in here because it makes sense to me when I'm sitting with it and thinking about the extraction of black women's wombs over the centuries. Extraction of wombs. What becomes of that? And where does that trauma go? Where does the trauma go? So somehow, it's an embodied knowledge. I suffer from terrible period pains. And every time I experience my cycle, I ask myself, but what is going on here? Like, this is so intense, right? Like, and then, you know, there's a constant scare of fibroids. So they are always near. They always feel like they're over here. So I have the embodied experience of this thing. It's not in here. It's not in my mind. It's here. And so when I want to articulate it, it's not going to be in the language of doop, doop, doop. This article is going to argue that, da, 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 da. No, I'm going to ask my body to speak. And poetics is for me the language of the body.
Hi.
Hello.
This follows on from that subject. You mentioned that the epic was related to the feminine for you, and this question and answers some of it to me, but I was wondering more about the epic specifically and how you think about that in relation to other forms within poetry, and why you came to this form.
I mean, you know, I have to also, and this also speaks to the previous question, it's not that when you write, you sit and think, okay, now I'm going to write poem. Now I'm going to write essay. Now I'm going to, I wish that's how it worked. You simply, I always have questions. And I sit with questions, and then, you know, they percolate, and I go to the page. I don't know what form is going to come out. So, like I said, with Mind, I thought I was going to write a collection of poems, but it came out as an epic. And I think that I see this as representing the inward journey of grief and how vast interiority is. That I thought I'd just go, kum, 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 and then no, it was, and I was there for like movements and movements and movements and movements. It's so vast inside of us, guys. And it was my family, it was my lineage, then it was, you know, Johannesburg, then it was the country, then it was the continent. You know, that's the only way I can answer that question. It's not a deliberate act. I don't. Sometimes when I know that I want to write an essay because I have a particular kind of argument or an exploration. And then during the essay itself, it changes into the poetic, right? So, yeah, it's not deliberate. It's not deliberate.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
Yes, I'm well.
Okay.
Maybe dehydrated, but
Do you want more water?
I'll take yours.
Okay.
Can I?
Yes, you can. Take it.
Okay. I don't know how to phrase this question. I'm not well after hearing your reading. I feel my bones are shaking and I feel very heavy. Very moving for me. I wanted to ask you about grief. So my understanding of grief is a process that leads to healing, and you say the world has ended for blackness, as for black people. And so what needs to happen now, from my understanding, what needs to happen now is grief, so we can heal. And I just wanted to know what your process is, because I also know that, you know, grief for many people is a process that has like a procedure. You eat certain things, you wear certain colors, you don't speak to certain people, you know, you have to follow a procedure. So what is yours? And how do we come together as black people and grieve together and hold each other so that we can heal and be reborn, I guess. Yeah.
I have so many things to say, so let me just, because there were, in preparation for today, there were parts where I wanted to just ask us to cry together, just kind of lead us into crying, and I decided against it. Because of how deep black grief is, there's something very particular about black grief. If we start crying, we might be crying about this, and then it can just open into other cries and other tears. You know how our mothers said, don't cry, because they knew that if we start crying, we might never stop, because it will just keep peeling layers to reveal more pain, more loss, more grieving, more loss, more and more, right? So the grief is deep for black people, for the black body. I do not believe that healing is a thing that you can attain. It's not a thing you can do with a 5-step process, despite what the psychologists want to tell us. It's a journey, grief and healing. Healing is an ongoing journey, and there are moments of reprieve. After writing this, it feels like purging. I really, I'm sharing too much information about myself, but I want to. Sometimes I get on all fours. It feels like to push out this pain, to breathe and pant, to pant this pain out. Yeah. The pain is deep. Can someone hold her? So it's sitting in our bodies, and my own processing, my mother and my sister worry about me because my work is is about, I work in critical race studies, so I teach and read and write about colonialism, apartheid, slavery. They're just like, wow, you chose this for yourself. Like, are you okay? Like, can't you have chosen, I don't know, anything else that's available to you? But it's my work, it's my calling to witness. I'm here to witness, I'm here to listen, I'm here to hold. That's why I was interviewing exile returnees. It's my work to witness and to produce this. And I have my own practices of moving this in my body. You saw my practice when I arrived. You see I tend to the body. If I feel like I move it. I am in the mountains all the time. So that's my practice. I also just want to add that when I say the world ends for Black people all the time, it also begins. It's like two-sided. The world ends, and then here we are again. Look, we are alive. I'm shocked. How are we even alive? How are we even able to love and to garden and to make food and to be together and produce jazz and make beautiful paintings? How is that even possible? Everything has tried to kill us and failed, in the words of Lucille Clifton. Because the world ends and begins for us in the morning.
One more question, and then yes.
Dumela.
Re a locha.
Le kae sisi?
Rona le kae?
Re gona.
Ke bjano.
Wa ba papata matso? I'm so traumatized by your book. For just the little bits that you offered, I'm very traumatized. You know, when I was going to primary school, there were kids who used to like reciting their stuff from class. So that's how sometimes you got to know of things that you are not necessarily studying.
Yeah.
You know that thing.
Go Bantu education.
Yeah, never and they recite it. Like, 1962, Jan van Riebeeck came to South Africa. And then you were like, oh, okay.
Yes.
But I remember distinctly two things that I heard that really disturbed me as a child. The first one was that people traded cows for mirrors. And to this day, you can hear an adult. You know, if a child is saying it, but when I hear an adult say that, I just go crazy. And then the second thing was that people came to Johannesburg for work. Not what happened before, the cattle tax. Not what happened before, taking people's lands, chopping off their fucking heads. You know what I mean? So we must be direct about these things. If there's so much black grief, it's because of whiteness. Don't be afraid to say whiteness. Even if, yes, it's capital, it's political, it's the machine. So I feel like we mustn't do that. Yes, it has those many faces, but its underlying nature is because people decided they were going to be white. So they must take the name as well. You know what I mean? We mustn't separate the capitalism. They come in degrees, yes. But the point is that the crime scene has a criminal. As much as we can talk about the crime scene, but I really appreciate your excavation of the crime scene. And yeah, it's traumatizing because I know what it's about. But it's also traumatizing because no one in my family in Kilabereka go mining. You know what I mean? So the degrees of separation and just how mining was reduced to gumboot dance, that's the only thing we know. Yo, I can imagine what that song does to you. And I'm truly sorry for what this country has done to your family. Not because I own it. And it's not even a country. It's a white concept that happened at black people's expense. There's no such a thing as South Africa. Because even it affects the whole region. But I'm sorry for what this modernity, another one of its synonym for whiteness, has done. But I can't imagine the horror. That is just, you know what I mean? On top of working for nothing all your life. But thank you very much.
Do you have capacity for one more question from me? Yeah, from me.
Always.
You do?
Not these complex ones.
No, it's I think it's not complex. I wanted to ask about something that may have surprised you in the process of this work. Yeah. What has surprised you?
What surprised me was my grandfather being very present in the writing of the book. Speaking, wanting his life to be known, wanting his story to be known. Akitsoka. I was surprised by that. He was very present. I'm going to leave it there because I could say more about that. But yeah, he was so present in the writing of this book. That's why I had to work through it through ritual. Any 3 a.m. gang people here? Yes, I see you. Yeah, I had to really make appointment with listening in for him.
Okay. I think we will put a pin here. It doesn't mean the conversation's over. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for being present. Uhuru, thank you for birthing anything is not easy. To share and to be here and to be present with the work is not light work. Thank you for showing up today, but also for showing up before today in the ways that you have, and for sharing this work with us. Thank you to all of you for showing up here today to be present with the work and with the conversation. The book is for sale, and I think Uhuru is giving her $1 million signature. No?
Okay, yes.
No.
Yes,
No
yes,
pressure, no
that's fine.
pressure, no pressure. But yeah, I think this brings us to the close of this evening.
I want to also thank you for honoring the invite, for saying yes, and for being such a gracious and generous interlocutor and holder of this space. Really, really great. So thank you so much for being here too, for coming out and for reading the work and preparing that beautiful offering at the beginning. Much appreciated.
Thank you, everybody. Yes, you can. You can. And if you want to... Yeah.